Thanks for watching this Facebook Live video today. Today we have a special guest in the APNIC office. We've got Eddy Winstead from ISC. Welcome, Eddy.
Thank you.
With Eddy here, we thought we'd take the opportunity to talk to him about the upcoming DNS root zone key signing key rollover, or the KSK roll. You may have heard about this already, but if you're doing DNSSEC, this is a big deal and something you should be aware of. So let's start at the beginning though first. We won't assume any knowledge, especially for those of you who don't know much about the process. So Eddy, can you just to start off with just explain quickly what the KSK roll is and why it's important?
Sure. So a little bit of background about the DNS itself. So the DNS protocol is 30 years old, and over 30 years old, and it was designed during a time when security was not a concern. So securing DNS data was not part of the equation, right? We wanted to make it scalable, make it do delegations and have people have authority for their own domains. So all that in the original DNS design is great and has worked exceptionally well. But again, we did not have security built into that model. So this is where DNSSEC comes along. You can think about it this way: in regular DNS, there's chains of authority. So if I want to delegate something from the .au domain to you, then I do that via a delegation, and that establishes what's called a chain of authority. Mm-hmm. Well, since security was not in there with DNSSEC, we introduced something called a chain of trust. All right. So a chain of trust allows me to do a delegation to you or someone else, and you can cryptographically validate that that delegation is proper. Okay. So chain of authority in the old DNS, regular DNS, chain of trust in DNSSEC. Now, where the KSK becomes important is the KSK is essentially the trust anchor for all this to work, right? Mm-hmm. So for a long time, politically, it was, no one could decide on who was going to actually sign the root zone, right? So that was one of the large hurdles in deploying DNSSEC. That was finally decided, and in July of 2010, the root zone was signed, and we've been able to do DNSSEC validation since that time. At that time, it was stated that the root key, the cryptographic key that is the key signing key, would be rolled at some point after 5 years. So we have met that minimum threshold, yeah. Certainly. So we're here almost 7 years later doing the key roll. So the reason that it's important to do this key roll it's a couple of things. We hear about changing passwords from time to time. You can think of it in that way. Over time, the longer a key is exposed to the world, and DNS is public data after all, the key gets weaker. So it's time for us to roll it. The other thing that is you want to do a roll under normal operations. You don't want to have to do a roll during an emergency situation. So we're doing a controlled roll. This is a new process. It's not been done before, but we suspect it will go well. At least we hope so. But that's part of why I'm here to help educate.
Absolutely. So in this process, there's going to be a number of key dates along the way, because as you mentioned, it's never been done before. So it's been done in a very controlled way, mm-hmm. And I think the first big date, first big dates is when the new key is introduced, is published to the root zone. I think that's happening on July the 11th, and then around about 1 month later, that key will then be in August trusted in the systems, basically.
Yes, yeah, and so that it's important that that's a good point that you made, that the new key is the key's already been created. So it's created in other infrastructure. It has not been published yet. It will be published in July, as you said. If you're running software that does RFC 5011, there's this time frame in which a new key can be published and that you will trust it. And so sort of the idea is if we're already doing DNSSEC and you know that I'm publishing valid DNS data because you're able to validate it cryptographically, then if I publish a new key, it makes sense that you could trust that new key if I'm the one that's publishing it, if it still validates. So the thing that people think about most of the times with these dates is there's going to be an increase in the DNS message size that's come in response size that comes from root servers. So that's one of the places that people could have issues. If they have devices that can't handle a larger response size, DNS message size, then there could be problems. The good news on that is that a lot of people have been doing a lot of research to make sure that this is going to go smoothly. APNIC is certainly one of those. Jeff Houston's done a lot of work and is alerting a lot of people as to whether or not he thinks their software or their instances are going to handle this increase in DNS message size.
Yep. I think one of those size increases is around sort of the September timeframe. I think September 19th, which is just under a month before the key roll. So it's a good time, I suppose, for once that size increase comes through for people before the roll actually happens to test their systems to make sure they can handle that kind of message size.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are tools out there that you can use for testing. I can't think of any right off the top of my head, but we'll provide some resources, so you can go to APNIC's blog and find some resources on this topic. There's also a blog at ISC about this KSK rollover coming, and ICANN as well is doing a lot of education, and you can search and find ways to see how you can make yourself ensure that your devices are able to handle this.
Yeah. So the key roll itself happens on the 11th of October, and then 3 months later, the old key, so the 2010 key, is revoked.
Yes.
So between those dates, I suppose, what are the sort of the kind of things that I suppose people should be looking out for, things that could go wrong, or how important are those dates, I suppose?
Well, those dates are important mostly for the DNS message size, making sure, again, the device, one of the problems that people, that's one of the pieces of infrastructure that tend to give people problems and things like this are firewalls, because they by definition, they block traffic. So we want to make sure that they're not blocking things based on larger response sizes. And then, the worst, I don't know if I want to get into scary scenarios, but if you're doing DNSSEC validation, the worst scenario for you is that after this key roll, or at some point during the key roll, your users are no longer able to validate DNS queries. So what that looks like to someone doing DNSSEC validation is that the domain no longer resolves. So this is something you definitely want to be aware of and be prepared for.
Yeah, definitely. So for those operators, so obviously ISC with Bind, I mean, those operators who are using Bind for their DNSSEC, what steps do they have to take to make sure that they're ready for this key roll, so those bad things don't happen?
Okay, so there's really two ways that you can go about doing DNSSEC validation with a Bind server, and that is sort of a manual effort and an automated effort. So for those of you that are listening that are running Bind, I really encourage you to go to the automated method that we're going to talk about. Then you won't have to worry as much about these dates. You'll still want to test and make sure things are working okay, but you shouldn't have to do all this stuff manually anymore. So with the early Bind releases with DNSSEC, there was a directive called trusted-keys, and essentially once the root was signed, you could put in the trusted-keys entry for the root, and your servers would then validate any domains that were DNSSEC signed. Newer versions of Bind have a directive called, or a configuration option called manage-keys, and so that's the one you're going to want to try to go to. So I guess the thing that I would say to folks watching is, number one, determine if you're doing DNSSEC validation. A lot of operators we run into, they don't know the answer to that question, and that's okay, but with this event going on, maybe you should figure it out. So check and see if you're doing validation, and if you are, check and see which method you're using. And very simply, you can do that by looking for trusted keys. That's the manual method, and managed keys is the automated method.
Okay. So if they're using the manual method, this means that these operators will literally have to go into their systems and reconfigure everything manually to check to make sure that they can handle the new key?
If they're doing it manually, what they'll need to do is you can have multiple keys per zone, and that works absolutely fine. So if you're doing it manually, and for some reason you don't want to switch to an automated method, there are some like corner case reasons people will do manual key management these days. But if you have to do it that way, then you can add the new key to your configuration manually.
Great. So if you've got some bind users who are out there who are listening, do this, but they do start to run into some issues. Mm-hmm. What should they do? Should they just turn off their DNSSEC, or what should they do?
Okay. First of all, I'll say please don't turn off your DNSSEC validation. It's been a long, hard road trying to get people to turn it on, so please do not turn it off. If you run into a problem, I'll say it this way: if there's a problem with the process at all, then there's sort of there was a KSK rollover design team who has come up with, if some problem occurs, there's ways that we can back out of this. Okay, so if there's a problem in the process like that, it's really not going to affect the operator, because the process is going to be stopped or paused or rolled back. You know, but if you do find that your configuration is not working at some point in this process for DNSSEC validation, I recommend you talk to your DNS vendor in whatever fashion you can. If you're using open source, all the open source vendors are prepared for this, so contact them directly. If you're using a commercial DNS product, of course you'll have commercial support. If you're doing bind specific, you can go to the bind-users mailing list, which is free and available to anyone to ask questions. But a lot of people have issues with posting their private configs on a public list, and so if you have that issue, please do contact us, and we'll work with you in some way.
Great. Mm-hmm. I forgot to mention before, but if you've got any questions out there, if you're watching the video, please send them through on the comments, and we'll endeavour to ask them. Are you expect? I suppose this hasn't been done before. Is there what's the sort of expectation, I suppose, from ISC? Do you think that this is going to be something which should progress reasonably smoothly if people are doing automatic updates, or are we sort of ready for anything?
We're always a little bit of both on those. No, honestly, I think this hasn't been done in production before, but there has been a lot of testing, and ISC has been involved with this extensively as well by the DNS software vendors to make sure that if you're doing the automatic key management, that this will be a no-op for you essentially. The new key will show up, you'll begin trusting it at some point, and then you'll begin validating data off of it. And so if you're not, so for bind, again, it's the trusted dash keys versus managed dash keys. So for other vendors, if you're not clear on how to do the automatic key management, just contact them and see what they recommend for you.
Yeah. One question I forgot to ask before when we were talking about the dates was January 11th, which is around the time when the old key will be revoked. At that point, if you're doing manual config, do you need to, I suppose, expunge that key, the old key, from your systems manually, or what could happen if you go on trusting it?
Well, if you're doing the manual, if you're still trusting it and you have the new one in there, you're not going to see any difference, right? The problem you're going to run into is if you have a manual configuration and you don't put the new key in, then at some point in this time, probably even before the revocation, your validation is going to stop working. So again, I hate to keep emphasizing, but if you're running bind or any of the other softwares, just please do turn on the switch to automatic management of the keys, because we say this has never been done before, and that is true. We've not done this key roll, but in the testing that we've done this key roll many times. Yeah. Okay, so we set timers to 15 minutes or something. So we do a key roll every 15 minutes. So the DNS software has been tested to do this. So this is, but of course, lab and production are always a little different. Always a little different. So
okay.
Yeah.
I'm just checking our questions. I don't think we've got anything so far. So, I mean, I suppose we've talked about it a lot, but I mean, is there anything that I've missed that I haven't asked you, or a message you want to leave with? You want to leave your those users who are using Bind?
No, I think you've covered it very well. So the questions were great. Thank you. Thank you for having me again. Just again, this DNSSEC is important. It's important for ensuring that if you really think about, I often ask people, like, when I'm giving a talk about DNS, like, how many of you have trusted the DNS today? And almost everyone will raise their hand, right? We all trust the DNS. So DNSSEC is just another method by which we ensure that we're getting the right answers to the questions that we're asking. So this KSK role is another important moment in the the history of DNS and the history of DNSSEC. So from a Bind perspective, again, just switch to that automated key thing, and you shouldn't have to. I keep thinking back to like the Y2K issues when I was a young sysadmin back then, and staying up till midnight to watch and see if it worked. And if you switch to this automated key management, it should not be the same situation for you.
Great, thank you. Well, thanks, Eddy, for coming in. Appreciate it, and for taking the time to explain that. And thanks for watching. We'll post at the end of this in the comments section the link to that blog post you mentioned on the ISC website, which gives a lot more information to Bind users on sort of what to expect and where to get resources. We'll also publish a link to ICANN's website. They've got a bunch of great resources as well. And if you have any questions afterwards, obviously this video will live on our Facebook page. So if you've got any other questions after that, please post them there, and we'll make sure that we get back and answer them. Thanks again, Eddy, and thanks again for watching.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.